Where's my video?
Oh,
ta-da!
hello.
Hi there. How's it going?
Yay.
Let me-
Oh, gosh, this makes me so happy.
Awesome. What's happening? Nice to officially meet you. So hello.
Hi. So good to meet you. Yay, we're excited.
Awesome. Yeah, same here. Same here. This will be fun.
Yes, thank you so much for being a part of our podcast. We're really excited to get to know you more and learn some things from you.
Cool. Me too.
Yeah. Do you have any questions or anything before we get started, or?
No, I don't. I mean, great questions on that you sent, to my email. So, I mean, some of them I can answer wholeheartedly easy. Some of them I'll have an opinion on, but not necessarily a ton of experience in. And, some of them, like the book you asked me about, I've never read it before, but I have no problem admitting that. And, if we want to have a dialogue about that, that's fine as well.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
cool. Yeah, I don't know how many, we're going to get to probably most of the questions, but we not all of them. I got a little excited. Like, we're going to answer everything.
I love it. Let's do it.
Perfect. Okay, you ready, Miss M?
Mm-hmm.
How do you want to start?
Just ask. You can ask her the question.
Okay, beautiful. So the first question I'd like to bring in is, what is easy water?
Oh gosh, it's my favorite topic in the world. So I'm excited that you asked that to start off with. Easy water is a different water than what we typically think of with water. So I know back when I was in grade school, and I think I first learned about the different phases of water, I was told, water has 3 phases, right? It's either a liquid, a solid, or a gas. And I kind of assumed, I guess, at that point that was all I needed to know about water. And that was the end of the story. And then fast forward into, college and grad school, where I took a bunch of physiology, molecular biology, biochemistry type classes. And again, I was told, water is a byproduct, or water is there, it's in the cell, it's in the body, it's there, but it really is inert, right? It's not doing a ton of stuff, but yeah, there's water. And then all of a sudden I dove into the realm of quantum biology. And I now hold water in such high regard because the water inside of our bodies is so different than how I was ever led to believe. And so exclusion zone water, easy water, is the type of water inside of our cells, inside of all the crevices in our body where water exists. And it structures itself into a different phase beyond those 3 phases that I learned about in grade school. It's actually in a 4th phase. And that 4th phase is what's called a liquid crystal, which I have just found so fascinating because liquid crystals have special properties. But it's a liquid crystal because the molecules of the water, unlike when it's in a glass in its liquid state, where the water, the H2O, kind of sloshes around and it forms bonds with one and then the other and kind of mix and matches, it does a little dance with all of the molecules. In a liquid crystal, it holds a shape, it holds a form and a structure. So oftentimes people have also referred to this as structured water, because when water is in its EZ phase, it's structured in these beautiful hexagonal patterns in the body. And so it has more of a rigidity to it. It's actually more of like a gel consistency as opposed to a liquid or a solid. It's a gel, like as opposed to liquid or ice. And so that gives it the property of like a crystal. So think like a diamond where everything is ordered, but also it has some fluidity. It can move a little bit more, maybe more like honey too. It's got some viscosity to it. So that's why it's a liquid crystal. And I specifically think we were designed to make this liquid crystal water because it gives us so many ways to interact with our environment.
Beautiful. I can remember when I first learned about the 4th phase of water, and I was like, we're literally crystalline beings. Like, we have crystals in our body.
It's so cool. I mean, it's so beautiful too, if you think about it, because every time I picture a crystal, I think of a prism or a diamond or something like that. And it just how light shines and interacts with a crystal, that right there is just such a beautiful image. So that's how I think of myself, is like, I need to gather up all of the light in my environment because I am a crystal and I want that interaction.
Wow. So then is everybody's water inside of them like that, or can you do things to make it more like that? And are there benefits of having that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're designed to build spontaneously, that water, next to all of our biological surfaces. So membranes, proteins, organelles, you name it. Everywhere we in our body, we will build in a layer of what's called that that liquid crystal. We need enough of it though. Because that liquid crystal, that easy water, one special thing about it is that it's negatively charged. And typically when water in its other phases it's neutral. It has no charge. It's not positive, not negative, it's neutral. And we do know, this is not a controversial statement, the negative body needs a negative charge. So basically we need more electrons and protons. We need a negative charge to run optimally. And what I'm seeing in clinical practice a lot is that we're not necessarily getting that negative charge, or we're depleting that negative charge. And there's a lot of reasons that can happen. So we'll always have some easy, but yes, there are things in our environment that I think are depleting it. And there's things that we can do to build it back up. So unfortunately, non-native electromagnetic fields, non-native frequencies are in our environment are showing time and again in the research to diminish it. So picture what's happened to the human species over 10,000 years, right? We all of a sudden went from living outdoors in touch with all of the frequencies of nature, which stems from what's available to us from the sun, the moon, the cosmos, the earth, the ground, the electrons and the Schumann resonance and all of these things, all of these frequencies that were available to us, including the frequencies of things like nature sounds. There's a reason why nature sounds are healing, right? Because birds chirping is a frequency, the sound is a frequency. And we've disconnected ourselves from that. And we've brought ourselves into a mostly indoor existence. And in an indoor existence, we're disconnected from the natural frequencies. And instead, I might have a Wi-Fi router next to me, and I might have my cell phone next to me, and I might have artificial lights shining down on me. And all of those frequencies that are non-native, non-natural, we know have the potential to diminish that exclusion zone water inside of us.
Can you explain like native EMF then, if there's
Sure.
non-native?
Yeah, so the native EMFs are any frequency that has basically established the planet and the universe, right? And so that is the fact that the light from the sun travels at us, and that's an electromagnetic frequency. That's a native EMF. That includes the visible spectrum, the rainbow of colors that we would see if it were to get divided through a prism. It also includes the colors that we as a species can't see, but other species interact with and can see. So that's infrared, that's ultraviolet. And then we can extend out, they're in longer frequencies than the infrared ones, and then there's shorter frequencies than the ultraviolet. And so we literally have all of every celestial being, from the moon to the stars to the planets, all also emit their own frequencies. And I would, if I was listening to myself 5 years ago, I would kind of think I was crazy for thinking like those things are impactful, because I didn't think that we had any way to really interact with that, because I was taught that I was a bag of chemicals, right? I was just a bunch of chemicals. And so how is it possible that the lunar cycle impacts me? How is it possible that Saturn's position impacts me? I would have even said that there's no way that the light frequencies from the sun impact me in that way. Yeah, plants go through photosynthesis, right? Plants and some bacteria need it, but not me. And then the other frequencies that we can think of too that are native are the frequencies of what's called the Schumann resonance. So it's like Earth's heartbeat, right? It's this resonance that the Earth's surface releases and bounces off a part of the atmosphere called the ionosphere, and it resonates at a specific frequency. And Earth's magnetic poles, magnetic field is something that would have is a natural frequency. So there's a ton of natural frequencies in our environment, and every time you look at those natural frequencies, you see it has a healing and a beneficial effect to be tied to those natural frequencies. And that's because that exclusion zone water, that liquid crystal inside of us, one of the things that it does to figure out the frequencies in our environment is it traps those frequencies. It can actually hold the vibration of those frequencies and communicate that to all the molecules in my body, all the rest of the water in my body. And so I want to trap the frequencies that have been around for a long time and are the healing frequencies. And that then will resonate a healing frequency to all of the other molecules in my body, as opposed to these other frequencies that are a bit jarring, right? So the non-native ones, like I talked about, the Wi-Fi, the cell phones, the radio waves, even, and this is a really good one, I think, to get people to understand the concept of EMF. Right now, I don't hear any radio stations in my immediate environment. However, if I had a radio, right here, I could turn it on and I could turn the dial, and all of a sudden I might hear a sporting event, a rock song, a commercial, a news station, because in this space around me are so many frequencies. And that is how we as a species, and every living species learns to adapt to what's in our environment. It's like, what frequencies are there really determine how my body responds physiologically to my environment. And so basically this boils down to the frequencies that have been around, that are from nature. We've grown with them for millions of years, and they have a beneficial, healthy effect. They establish a specific circadian rhythm and a specific physiology that's super beneficial to me. Whereas these ones that haven't been around for but maybe 100 years or less, they're more jarring to my physiology. And my exclusion zone water interacts with them all. And so I want to make sure that my liquid crystal is surrounded by the healing frequencies of nature, as opposed to these non-natural, these created frequencies that haven't been around for very long.
Mm-hmm. When you're saying you want to, yeah, we want to do that also, but it's incredibly difficult right now living in a civilized human. There's very few places on the earth that you can go to be exposed to no non-native EMF. So do you see that, if you do spend more time outside and you do try to get at that frequency and at that vibration, then your body accumulates more easy water, then you're not having as many harmful effects?
Yes, I believe 100% that that's true. So I don't think that there's but a handful of places, like you said, on the planet where we will never encounter the non-native, or where we won't encounter those non-native electromagnetic fields. And so what I'm seeing, what I'm practicing, what I'm finding with clients is that when we do consistent exposures to the natural ones, it fortifies that exclusion zone water. It holds that resonance, that healing resonance, for longer than I think we've ever appreciated. And then just consistent exposures throughout the day can have a lasting impact. And so this is also where the quantum aspect of healing for me is so fascinating, because it works in something called a non-linear effect. We think very linearly these days, right? So it's like, okay, I want to get stronger at push-ups. So today I'm going to do one push-up. You got these push-up challenges. I'm going to do one push-up today, then 2 push-ups tomorrow, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. And you have to progressively overload more and more and more to see the results that you want to see. It's linear. It works at that scale. Mm-hmm. When you're dealing at the quantum scale, which is when I'm talking about electrons, we're going back to basic chemistry, like electrons, protons, particles from the sun, and light called photons. When we're dealing at that tiny scale, a small stimulus can actually lead to a cascade of beneficial effects. Mm-hmm. So while one push-up every single day might not build strength the way I would want to, seeing 1 minute of sunrise outside grounded every single day can actually create an amazing healing cascade because it deals with what's happening at the quantum level, that subatomic particle level. So I think that if we can wrap our brain around how can I modify my working environment and my living environment to be more in tune with nature? Am I opening more windows? Am I grounding barefoot as much as I can? Am I before I step into my car, am I touching my bare hands to the earth? What are things that we can do to interact with the natural frequencies? And I think that if we can slowly accumulate that consistently throughout the day and establish those little habits, that is profound.
That is profound. I coach my clients to hug trees. Or literally hug a tree. It's so good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hug a tree. I even then tell people that's why we want plants in our house. That's why we want animals inside of in our inside environment. That's why we even rocks, like it's so weird, but rocks, other crystals and stuff, those trap frequencies, right? That from nature, and then they can resonate back to us in our internal environment. So if we can do that sort of stuff when we're outside, hug a tree, and when you're inside, have a bunch of plants around you, that can be just, one little shift we can make to creating like a harmonious resonance inside of us.
Yes. I think the biggest frustration as a coach in this field is that there's not enough perceived seriousness or perceived susceptibility with technology use and with, not connecting with nature, because people don't see these things immediately, right? Humans want to be like, I want to feel better immediately. So it's, how do you kind of deal with that of, explaining how these things are slowly accumulating? And then that's why we're seeing these people dying from lifestyle diseases. It's because the accumulation of all of these things.
Right. Absolutely. And the one that I tackle first always is lighting environment, because, I'm not a fan of Dr. Google, right? But there's enough research being put out about how this blue light from screens and overhead lighting and shift work, so a non-natural lighting spectrum throughout a 24-hour clock, there's a ton of research being put out, and we're now understanding that our lighting environment can either be healing or harmful, to the extent that it can cause cancer. It can cause autoimmune conditions and other inflammatory conditions. So I think that is where I like to start, because it doesn't sound as weird as your cell phone is, or like, your cell phone's killing you, or, sit next to that Wi-Fi router is doing something to you, because we can't feel that necessarily. And then when we shift lighting environment, that oftentimes shifts two things for me with clients. When I tell them to get as much morning light exposure into their eyes as possible, without naked eyes, outside as much as possible. When I ask clients to do that I do it specifically because that impacts brain chemistry. It produces more serotonin in the brain. It produces more dopamine in the brain. It produces more norepinephrine, endorphins, all these things to make us feel really good. So when we can all of a sudden say, okay, I'm going to take a morning walk outside with naked eyes, and that one is one that clients start to say they crave. And then the cascade effect with that, besides just having those beautiful brain chemicals, is it's setting their circadian rhythm. So it's using light to sync up every physiological process that their body is going through on a 24-hour clock. It with at night, amount of melatonin that we build up in the morning after darkness eventually becomes melatonin. Serotonin becomes melatonin for us. And so that's where then I tackle the evening light environment. Are you blocking the blue light with blue blockers, or the beautiful red lights and stuff that I see you have in the background? I mean, are you using circadian supportive lighting strategies? If I start to get people to shift their lighting environment, they notice it to the extent that they want to explore more. And that's where I can say, oh, by the way, put your cell phone on airplane mode at night. Oh, by the way, can you hardwire your house? Or, if your Wi-Fi router is directly next to you, can you instead install it someplace where it's not going to be by you all day long? So little things like that, then we can chip away at. And I feel like it is most impactful when I start with light.
It's so good, Carrie.
Let me know. Like I love to talk about this. So I want to make sure that it feels like it's accessible to everyone, because I think that this message, the reason why I especially love talking about light and quantum biology is because it has applications no matter what someone's diet dogma is, or no matter what someone's profession is, or whatever it is impactful across the board. And so I feel like it is a place where ultimately it's going to unite all of us and bring us all together. And we can recognize we've gone astray in terms of the light and the other electromagnetic fields that are dominating our environment. And so then we can all then feel better and connect better when we get back to nature. And it's not woo. It happens at that quantum level. There is so much quantum biology behind it. And that's why I love it, because it's like I love when I'm teaching a class or a lecture or something, and someone says, there's someone who challenges it, right? Like, but what? And it's like, wait a second. I know it sounds weird and it sounds too good to be true, or it sounds a little like, what in the heck is she talking about? But the quantum mechanism is there. And there's enough clients who have been so impacted by changing their light and reconnecting with nature and grounding more and cold exposure and all these things that are affecting that quantum scale, that I think we can really start to unite around this, as opposed to become divided on social media, keto, carnivore, vegan, vegetarian, paleo. It's really easy to find our differences. And I think this is where we can all come together.
Yes, definitely. And I think too, the beautiful thing about nature is that it's free and it's accessible, right?
Yeah.
That there's so many things that you can do when you're just starting to learn about being like light conscious, or being a conscious consumer of your eyes, and what that actually triggers and signals in your body and your being, that you can do today, you can do tomorrow, that they are very accessible, and that those small actions really do have that cascading effect to that in-body experience. And I think that, people see and feel the value of going outside in the morning and getting that sunlight or daylight. I like that you say daylight. In Seattle, sometimes we don't get very much sunlight. So daylight, right?
Right. All the frequencies are still there, right? Cloudy, snowy, it's all still there.
Then they can look at investing if they want to get a red light or glasses, or kind of take it further, but that you can get so many, even exercise, right? That is heat within the body, that changes on that quantum level as well. And that's everyone can move their body in some regards to create that.
Yes, no, that's a great point. It is, I think I think people are going to talk about this more, but it is free, right? So it's not like you have to buy a huge panel or sauna or some crazy supplement line in order to experience this. And so that's why I love the fact that, I love the fact that somehow this has become my message to get across to people, is this idea of the light, because it is free and it's easy and it's accessible. And I want people to feel empowered by that. I want people to say, wait, okay, I can see the sunrise, and I can eat outside at lunch or take a little lunchtime walk, and I can stand barefoot as long as it's not negative, 4 degrees where I am. I can stand barefoot in the grass on a beautiful Saturday afternoon as I'm pulling weeds. I feel like this becomes accessible and it can be layered. And so that I do love that. And I think that you also touched on one of the specific light frequencies that I think is most beneficial to us and has a really profound healing and anti-inflammatory effect. And that's the infrared, the heat. We don't think of heat as a light frequency, but it is, because, you picture those infrared goggles that we see being used in whatever military situations or something, those types of things. And what are they picking up? They're picking up light off of living and breathing creatures in the form of that's the infrared heat that they're picking up, but it's a light frequency that's being filtered through those goggles, the night goggles. Our body, I think the 2 frequencies of light that the human body has found to be most profound is the infrared light and the ultraviolet light. And so that's so cool, because infrared, there's so many ways, like you said, that it's free for us and we can make it ourselves. And the cool part about how that ties to that liquid crystal water inside of us is, while I talked about what detracts from and shrinks this liquid crystal, the research is showing that infrared expands, it restores our liquid crystal. It makes it grow 4 times or more its original size. And so if we're in these environments that are depleting that liquid crystal, we have to continue to do things that provide our body infrared to continue to reestablish and build back that exclusion zone water. And so I am frankly, am starting to think that, exercise has been researched a ton on at the chemical level, like what it does chemically for us to heal us. Other things too, like intimacy, cuddling, sex, all these things have been talked about at what they do at the chemical level to influence us. Even light exposure talked about at the chemical level. I really think that the benefit of all of these is that they generate infrared inside of our bodies, and it expands that exclusion zone water inside of us, which restores that negative charge and allows us to interact better with the natural frequencies in our environment, which across the board, I think that all of them have that in common. And so what are some of my favorite ways to get this infrared? Exercise that makes it heat up, right? Anytime you do a movement that makes you heat up, you're making infrared. Anytime you're doing something that generates heat of any sort, so maybe it's even a campfire, there's infrared right there. What about then, going to the beach? That's infrared. Now, where I am, there still is infrared. Infrared is always present in sunlight. As from when the sky starts to lighten till when the sun sets, right? There's always infrared. It just might not feel like heat always, because infrared doesn't have to feel like heat to be infrared. That's just a small portion of infrared. Mm-hmm. So anytime you can be outside and get naked skin to the light, we're getting that infrared. So yeah, I feel like all of these things are great because I can make a fire in the fireplace. I can do something that generates heat in my body. I can go outside. I can cuddle with someone under a blanket, my kids, my husband, my cat, I can cuddle and generate heat that way. And it's profound. And all those things we know already have established health benefits. And I think that the infrared is what links it all together.
Yeah, or taking a hot shower.
A hot bath, even cold exposure, which I think is a tough one to convince people to do at first. That's like way down the line. But when we actually allow our body to experience cold, the tiny little mitochondria inside of us that make ATP, they make water for us. They also make heat for us. So in response to cold, when our body starts to feel cold, they're going to produce more heat. More heat's going to create more of that exclusion zone water. And again, it's just like this beautiful healing cycle that we have built into us.
I have a question about the mitochondria creating heat
Sure.
versus creating energy,
Mm-hmm.
because I've had symptoms of thyroid dysfunction, and there was some research about that the issue is that the mitochondria is creating too much heat and not creating enough energy. So do you have any knowledge about when there's that imbalance if it's creating too much heat versus energy?
Yes. And so, I can absolutely dive into that. So in order for mitochondria to make, and so here's the deal, right? I shift my language a little bit when I'm talking about mitochondria because they make water, ATP, and heat for us. I don't call ATP energy because I think the energy comes from all of those things. So, but what happens when mitochondria, anytime we're dealing with an autoimmune condition, or even things that cause, let's say we ate gluten, right? I react to gluten and I feel exhausted. I feel really like stomach crampy. I feel pain. And the next day I feel swollen all over. And what happens with inflammation is that swelling that swelling doesn't just happen like where I can feel it in my joints. Maybe, it's like I can tell my rings, my fingers are swollen, or I can tell like my eyes feel a little puffy. It doesn't just happen there. It happens all over our body. And that swelling even happens inside of our mitochondria. And our mitochondria are where we make water, ATP, and that infrared heat. And mitochondria, to do that, they take electrons. So again, why I talk on the quantum scale, they don't take carbs, protein, fats, right? They don't take macronutrients and make these things. They take electrons, and electrons can come from so many places. So those electrons then get funneled through a series of steps. And maybe people have heard of it, that's called the electron transport chain. Perhaps that was 8th grade biology. And we heard it once and we forgot about it, but I'm reintroducing it to people because those bacteria or those little mitochondria take electrons, and that electron transport chain is just like a conveyor belt, or I call it like stepping stones. It's like this electron jumps from stepping stone to stepping stone to stepping stone. And step 4, there's 5 steps. Step 4 makes water. Step 5 makes ATP and infrared. Okay. Here's the deal now. Here's the deal. Anytime those mitochondria swell, you take those stepping stones and you spread them farther apart. And so electrons only like to jump so far. It's like me. You tell me there's a 10-foot river and I have 5 stepping stones and those 5 stepping stones are every 2 feet apart. I'll jump, no problem. Boom, boom, boom. I can easily jump across on those stepping stones to get across the river. You tell me I now have a 100-foot river to jump across and I still only have 5 stepping stones. And now I have to jump 20 feet. It's a very likely chance that I will not make that jump. And instead, I'll never get across the river. Electrons don't like to jump too far. And so if those mitochondria are swollen, we've swollen the space between the stepping stones. So now we're losing electrons. Instead of those electrons getting to step 4 and making water for us and being hydrating, and then getting to step 5 and making that ATP and making that infrared heat, we're losing electrons. And anytime we lose electrons, it is like losing heat. We're losing the ability to make that ATP. Oftentimes, we're not even getting to the step where we're making water. And so that is where I think issues happen in terms of not being able to make the infrared in the same way, not being able to make the ATP, not being able to make the water. And oftentimes when I have clients who are dealing with an autoimmune condition, they will tell me they feel puffy, but yet dehydrated. So puffy, yet dry, low energy, cold all the time. And that pretty much explains it right there.
Can you speak to some other impacts of, because inflammation is a big thing in the health and fitness industry right now. Like everything's anti-inflammatory.
Right.
Speaking to things that cause inflammation within our biology, just so that people know.
Sure. I mean, there's like a whole bunch of inflammatory cascades that happen in the body. So we can talk about it from the chemical level where, you've got something called the arachidonic cascade, right? That ends up in an inflammatory process that makes inflammatory cytokines. It's kind of a buzzword these days, inflammatory cytokines. You can talk about it how we've got something called the cell danger response, where the cell senses danger and it creates its own inflammation in the form of reactive oxygen species. What this boils down to ultimately is inflammation on that tiny scale is a bunch of unpaired electrons and extra protons, right? So so I just then want you to think it's a different way of looking at it. When we think about it from a nutrient standpoint, we say to ourselves, oh, I got to consume a bunch of antioxidants, right? I got to consume a bunch of vitamin C, or, I'm going to take this supplement that's like this greens juice, or, and those things may have benefit, right? I'm not going to knock that, but we actually can get electrons when they're in that inflammatory state. All they want is a friend. They just want another electron to pair up with. And when they find their friend, this other electron, they're happy. They don't create inflammation anymore. And so what I love to coach with this is that exclusion zone water is a source of electrons. When ultraviolet light too hits our body, it hits that exclusion zone water and makes free electrons. Grounding, bare feet on the earth, sucks up free electrons into our exclusion zone water. So we have a lot of ways to get free electrons, electron friends, to pair up with the inflammatory electrons to calm the reactive oxygen species, calm the inflammation. And so if we're looking at it from a quantum perspective, I associate almost all inflammatory states with a decrease in exclusion zone water. Sometimes it's in specific tissues, sometimes it's entirely throughout the whole being, the whole body, but it's just a lack of electrons. And when we have that lack of electrons, we just don't have enough friends to pair up the damage. Then you add on potentially things in our lifestyle that produces more reactive oxygen species. So that could be a toxin, it could be a heavy metal toxicity, it could be a mold toxicity, it could be not recognizing that there are certain foods that generate these reactive oxygen species and this damage inside of me. And so then it comes to, okay, there comes a point where I have to figure out what is producing more of these more of these inflammatory reactive oxygen species, these unpaired electrons. So what's driving that? And also, am I providing my body with enough electron friends through the nature and the other things that I talked about to be able to pair it up and get to that point where I have reached a happy point? I at least have enough electrons coming in and I'm making less reactive oxygen species where my body can start the healing process. I'm not just spinning my wheels. Does that make sense?
And that's what I think, we love cold plunging. We do quite a bit of cold plunging here. Emily lives out on an island, and so she has the ocean right there, which is quite cold and lovely and filled with salt.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I'm jealous. I love that. That's great.
Come visit.
I think that, just going back to the cold plunging, that is such a beautiful practice, because it is so good for our inner biology, but also our psychology, right? That it really does pull us into the present moment and really connects us to that embodied sense of being alive. But then it also shrinks and decreases that inflammation so that the electrons can.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head with that one, right? Because that cold exposure, especially when it's done in nature, a cold stream, a cold lake, a cold ocean, and even cold, like people, when starting cold, I think, I don't know, if you look up cold thermogenesis on social media, you see these people with these ice tubs and, just jumping into these baths full of ice. I mean, it's super intimidating. Cold only has to be colder than our body temperature. So, up north, when I'm in the summer, I do my cold plunge in Lake Huron, and it's 70, right? 70, maybe even 75 when I go. It's not insanely cold, but it's enough for my body and my mitochondria to sense a colder environment. And when mitochondria sense a colder environment, they make more infrared for us. They make more heat. And that infrared, because exclusion zone water is denser than the swollen water, the inflammatory water, the puffy bulk water that I feel in my joints and maybe under my skin or in my, in my tissues, because that is because exclusion zone water is more dense than that. If I make more exclusion zone water because I'm making more heat, because my mitochondria felt cold, my mitochondria said, I don't want Carrie to feel super cold. I'm going to make more infrared. That infrared could produce more exclusion zone water, and that exclusion zone water does have a shrinking effect. So now, instead of losing electrons to my environment, and every time I lose an electron, that's a reactive oxygen species, right? That's inflammation. So every time I lose electrons, I'm no longer losing as many electrons because, again, I've shrunk my river. I've gotten rid of all of that inflammatory water, and now I just have a bunch of exclusion zone water in between my stepping stones. And these electrons say, no problem, boom, 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 boom. I got this, I can do it. So cold is profound. And so if we can encourage more people to start cold exposure and cold plunges, I would love that. It can be a tough one, especially when someone is dealing with an autoimmune condition that already makes them feel cold or maybe more in pain, because the idea of getting into cold water isn't necessarily as appetizing as getting into a nice warm bathtub. But if we can convince them that at that level, the benefits are so amazing, maybe we'll get one cold plunger out of it.
Yeah, I recommending pairing it with, indoors, if you're doing like hot, cold showers, or if you're doing sauna and then cold, of like, okay, I want you to sit in the sauna until your psychology tells you that like a cold shower sounds good, right? I'm really trying to work with their psychology, but we're still humans, right? That it's like, if it's super unpleasant, oftentimes it's not going to stay in the routine. So being able to pair it with some things, and then when they start to feel benefits, then it's like, okay, now we're going to go outside, we're going to jump in the lake.
Absolutely. I do feel like, just for those looking to try, I feel like that being able to tolerate that about that 2-minute mark of cold, whether it's a cold shower, a cold plunge, whatever it might be, when we're talking about cold water, that 2-minute mark is where I start to at least get the parasympathetic effect from the cold. And so while it sounds stressful to the nervous system to get into cold water, it's actually super soothing. It takes us out of that fight or flight mode and puts us into that rest, relax, digest, healing nervous system. And it's just getting to that 2-minute mark. I think that I like to coach up with people. And I know the two of you talk about breathing, right? And I think breathing can be a big way to help people get to that 2-minute mark when they're first trying cold plunges.
Yeah, definitely. Can we jump into talking about breathing
Sure,
and
absolutely.
kind of nitric oxide and what the benefits are that and our nasal breathing and mouth breathing? Can you speak to that?
Sure. This is another one where don't get me wrong. I loved all of my learning experiences, but I never tied the big picture together of like, oh, the reason why I breathe oxygen is because the oxygen goes to my mitochondria and it ultimately becomes water right inside of my cells. I just never made that connection. And so, studying quantum biology and mitochondria and exclusion zone water, it finally clicked to me that oxygen's important, right? That would be a rate limiting factor for me to be able to make this beautiful exclusion zone water inside of me. If I don't have enough oxygen, it's just not going to happen. And so, diving into that, there's a significant difference in the amount of oxygen we bring in when we're breathing through our nose and when we are breathing through our mouths. And so back in, I'd say this was about 2 years ago now, I did the Bolt score. Are you familiar with the Bolt score or a Bolt test? Bolt test stands for blood oxygen level test. So I was going through my own performance breathing certification class that I was taking, and they suggested we all do this. And that is just simply after having sat for 2 minutes, just kind of breathing calmly, breathing normally, you just take a natural inhale, a natural exhale, close your mouth, close your nose, and count the number of seconds until you get the first sign of air hunger. Not a maximal breath hold, right? It's like air hunger. So air hunger for me typically feels like an involuntary contraction, either like in the back of my throat or maybe my diaphragm. Other people, it's just a thought like, yep, I'd breathe here. Like this would be breathing. And then, once you get that first sign of air hunger, you stop your clock, you unplug your nose, and you should be able to go back to just breathing normally. So it should just be a very normal breathing pattern that you're timing. And I thought to myself, oh, of course I'm an awesome breather, right? I was a college athlete. I still do all this stuff, high intensity interval training and all this fun stuff. Of course I'm an amazing breather. And my Bolt score was a 7, which is not ideal, right? Like minimum 20 seconds, not 7 seconds. And so that completely brought an awareness to my life of, wow, I must be a mouth breather in many, many different ways. And I never knew it. So I dove down that rabbit hole, right? Okay, so how do I switch this? Like, what can I do? And because I work at home, and oftentimes when I'm seeing clients, it's different, right? But when I'm just in front of the computer or maybe outside on a light break, I practice like mouth taping, right? Or at night when I'm sleeping, taping my mouth shut. Like, how does it feel to breathe more through my nose? Conscious breath holds, beautiful, like, just coached breathing practices. It's like, okay, I'm going to take this long of an inhale, hold, this long of an exhale, hold. And just doing that and being able to coach my breathing, it has been amazing in terms of how transformative it has been in the level of calm it provides my nervous system. So I do feel like I don't feel very frazzled at all. I'm grateful for that. And I also have found that when I translate it to high intensity interval training, one of my favorite things to do is hill sprints. My ability to do hill sprints all out and recover is awesome, right? And so I've just realized that I've been able to coach better oxygen utilization, and that then translates to when I'm sleeping, when I'm at rest. As long as I'm breathing through my nose, I'm getting beautiful oxygen exchange, because that gas perfusion of the lower lungs, when I can breathe into my lower lungs as opposed to the shallow breathing of breathing through my mouth, I bring in so much more oxygen into my bodies, or into my body and into my cells. So that's been profound. So that was a huge shift in terms of what my awareness in breathing was. And then I recognized the benefit of nitric oxide, which it's not talked about much, right? Nitric oxide, I don't know. It won the Nobel Prize, not too long ago. And it's touted as a very healing molecule. The body makes it situationally in order to you'll find this interesting. When we make nitric oxide, for every molecule of nitric oxide, we also make 2 molecules of water. And those molecules of water have been dismissed. But I ultimately think that the body is always trying to make this beautiful water and structure it into a liquid crystal. And so then that's a benefit too. Anything that we can do to make more nitric oxide will make more water that will structure into that beautiful exclusion zone. We will get the benefit of vasodilation from nitric oxide, meaning we're going to be able to have better oxygen exchange, better transport of nutrients and waste in and out, better blood flow. And so nitric oxide comes into play in terms of so many different pathways that we can go where it has a benefit. And the 2 ways that I've noticed are my favorite ways to build nitric oxide are exercise will do it, right? So exercise will make nitric oxide, but sunlight on my skin, specifically ultraviolet A light on my skin, will make that beautiful nitric oxide. And humming. I love to hum because I love the stimulatory effect of how humming produces massive amounts of nitric oxide in my sinuses, my sinus cavities, and how that then can get distributed throughout the body as well. So I found those to be 2 very profound ways to make nitric oxide. And it all stemmed from the fact that I realized what a dysfunctional mouth breather I was for probably my whole life.
Oh, that's why I'm connecting it to yoga. Lots of yoga is very about breathing, right? The oming sensation of it, right? They end with, like, you try and get to the portion of the om because it does your parasympathetic nervous system innervates with your vocal cords, and so it has that stimulating effect, and then also producing of nitric oxide, where you're like, they knew something for sure.
They knew something. I wish we weren't, or maybe my brain, maybe it's just how my brain has worked, although it's shifting quite a bit, but I wish I wasn't so show me the research, show me the clinical trial, show me because it has closed me off for a good 10 years of my career. It's only been within the past 5 years that I've gotten into the quantum biology, and the connection then has led me to realize, wow, there are so many healing strategies that have been used for thousands and thousands and thousands of years that are so profound. Yep. They knew on such a level, on such a better level than any clinical trial would ever show me. And it's just so humbling and amazing to reconnect with that and recognize how powerful that is.
Yes. Well, what would you know if you never read anything or no one ever told you anything? Right? You would know how the sun, all those things, we would just know our connection with nature. Like if no one told us or we didn't read anything, we would see the moon go through 28-day cycle. We would see these cycles in nature and just, have the understanding that we also are going through those cycles at the same point. So I see that a lot in this industry, right? Is that a lot of people do really want to see the research of those things, but then it's also like, but what do you really know, or what do you really feel like without, having to read anything? And that's why I like what you're talking about in the morning light, that people can just feel that. And I think that's our best.
It's an embodied knowing.
Yes.
Yeah. That's way more profound for a client and for me. So feeling it in my own body and reconnecting. I used to be a proponent of like gadgets too, like, the Oura Ring or like a sleep app. And it's like, wait a second, why do I need a device or a tracker to tell me how my body feels? Like, can I wake up and say, wow, that was good sleep? I remember having some really cool dreams, and I went to bed at this time. I woke up at this time. Things feel good, right? Or, that thunderstorm woke me up and I couldn't go back to bed. That was kind of crappy sleep. So, maybe I'll try to get better sleep tonight. Like, this idea of needing a device or an app, or frankly, like, an expert, right, to tell me how I feel, how I'm feeling. It's just we're not connected to our bodies anymore. And so that's why also that nature, like you said, it's like, okay, the moon has this moon cycle. Like, I personally recognize that, I ovulate on the full moon, I menstruate on the new moon, right? And it's like stuff that I never would have made note of before unless I started recognizing the light changes and the changes of the frequency and how it connects with me and how I feel. And, It does. It's in such a way, it's free. These connections are free, and they are so empowering because we start to realize more about us. And then I don't need so-and-so to tell me when to take a walk. I know when it feels good to me to take a walk. I don't need so-and-so to tell me eat here, here, and here. It's like my digestion does not feel good in the winter when I eat at 7 o'clock at night. So I'm not. I don't want to. Whereas in the summer, maybe I do. I feel better eating later. So it's like, it's just getting in tune with that so that we can realize our bodies intuitively know what makes us feel great. And it all comes back to, again, connecting back to nature, to the light environment, to the seasons.
Beautiful. No, I completely agree with Amanda and I always talk about that. People use their watch to see, when to move, when to sleep. People. But I do have a question about back to the easy water.
Yeah.
Is there a way, how do they test, how much easy water you have? Or is there a way, like, you said that Bolt test for the breathing, and I've heard of different breathing things for deuterium water, but is there like a test that or a way to kind of determine if
Not yet. So I'm teaching a certification. I'm halfway through teaching I'll say co-teaching. I'm definitely co-teaching a certificate of a quantum biology, circadian biology certification course for practitioners. And I was responsible for the mitochondria lecture and the exclusion zone water lecture, right? And so the second half of each lecture was, how do we know? How do we see this in clinical practice? What do we do? There's no tests, right? There are no tests, but what we can say is through a couple of simple questionnaires. It's like, I will ask my client, how much time do you spend outside, right? What does your typical day look like? How often are you in front of a screen? Do you wear sunglasses when you're outside? So like, there's a couple of things that I look for that are either, when a client has more artificial frequencies and or they're disconnecting themselves with the sunglasses, never going barefoot, there's things that I look at there that are kind of red flags to me to say, okay, this is potentially someone who's not building enough exclusion zone water. So when I look at an environment that's dehydrating of their exclusion zone, and then I combine that with them potentially talking to me about chronic inflammation. So that would be all the symptoms we know of chronic inflammation when it comes to either pain, anxiety, depression, swelling, gut issues, you name it. We know that there are so many different things that we can look for when it comes to inflammation. If there's someone that's dealing with chronic inflammation and they're living mostly an indoor life, and when they're outside, they're disconnected because they're in a car with their windows rolled up and sunglasses on, that's pretty much the pattern that I need to see to say, hey, I have a feeling that we can at least help tackle your body's inflammatory load by making more exclusion zone water. And here are 3 ways to do that. Like, then we'll say, okay, what do you think is the ways that you're going to be able to do this? And then we'll really hone in on how they might want to do grounding more, or infrared more, or ultraviolet light, on their skin more. And we work from there, but there's no good test, unfortunately.
When you're looking at, we talked about how morning light helps with serotonin and all these things, and there's definitely an increased use of SSRIs or, antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication. Do you see that, these lifestyle things can really help, like, still kind of offset those? And then, because that's something I'm super passionate about, is helping people, naturally produce these things. And my thing is, I see that, they're having to take these things because they're so disconnected from nature. So it's really difficult as a practitioner to try to convince them, to be doing these things. So do you just have anything to say about that topic?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yes. Okay. So what I see with neurochemicals and neurotransmitters in the brain is a lot like what we see with those mitochondria, right? Like when there's swelling that's happening in between the stepping stones of the mitochondria, you just take that as a scale up. The body is fractal, it's just the same thing repeating at different sizes, at different scales. And so when we take it to the level of the neuron, we know that no neurons are actually touching, right? So there's the ends of these neurons, and there are these synapses, which are, again, like a river, right? A river that these chemicals have to cross in order to propagate the message to the next neuron. One of the chemicals that gets released into the synapse is serotonin. So serotonin, in order to have its effect, has to go from the end of one neuron to the start of another, right? And if all of a sudden I'm swollen because I'm inflamed, I don't have enough exclusion zone water bringing things together. I have that really stretched out river that's 100 feet that I have to cross as opposed to 10. Then all of a sudden I either have to make way more serotonin to hopefully push it across, or that there's enough, or I have to figure out a way to shrink things back together, or ideally I'm doing both. So that's where this comes into play with things like depression and anxiety, where, okay, what can we do to get you to make naturally more serotonin? And specifically what we know through quantum biology is that in the backs of our eyes and in our brain, we have a buildup of a specific amino acid that eventually becomes serotonin. It's called tryptophan. And tryptophan is a specific type of amino acid called an aromatic amino acid. It just has a specific shape to it called a ring shape. These ring shapes are photon traps. They capture light, but they have to capture a specific frequency of light, a specific energy of light. And that provides this amino acid energy and information needed to then become the next chemical in the step, which is serotonin. So tryptophan's the amino acid that we associate, or the chemical that we associate with, after Thanksgiving, right? I had too much turkey. I feel so tired, so sleepy. It must be the tryptophan, because tryptophan is a calming amino acid. But the beautiful cycle of these neurochemicals we have is that tryptophan, yes, it's calming because in the morning we have a lot of tryptophan because we basically broke our melatonin. Melatonin breaks down to tryptophan. Tryptophan becomes serotonin when ultraviolet A light strikes it, right? And so we got all of that in our eyes. It happens to our eyes. Our eyes suck in the photons in our light environment. There's no ultraviolet A right now in my internal environment because the glass blocks it. So that's why we are really disconnected from this conversion, right? We feel groggy all day. We feel unmotivated all day because that morning UVA light takes my groggy, sleepy tryptophan, energizes it to serotonin. So I feel flipping good throughout the day. And then if I'm also doing the things that are making more serotonin, I'm making more exclusion zone water because I'm getting the infrared light frequencies. So I'm not only making more serotonin endogenously inside of my brain, but I'm also shrinking the distance it has to cross. And that right there then improves neurotransmitter function in the brain. So that's where we can see an impact in things like anxiety and depression. We can coach our body to make more of it naturally, and we can make it easier for those chemicals to go where they need to go.
Definitely. I'm taking a course right now with Stephen Porges. He wrote the polyvagal theory.
Yep.
And we were speaking about the myelination on the neurons.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting looking at that because things that help and improve the myelination also help and improve easy water. That there's so many stacking functions, right? That doing the simple things of getting sunlight in the morning, like touching the earth in the morning, like it literally has such a compounding effect to influence so many things for us to just feel good and just feel alive, like alive in your body.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it's really cool, because someone who might be a little hesitant to switch their way of eating, instead, if we can if we can give them some key things that we know are really impactful on a lot of different levels, that is where we can really start to get this message and spread it. So morning sunlight, my thing is if people just do one thing, it's get naked eyes outside in the morning as much as your day lets you, even if it's 3 minutes. So like after this lovely chat with you, I have a client then, I want to say my next client's at 11:30 or so. What I'm going to do with that client is, and my clients are used to this, right? And I encourage them as well. I'm going to go into my back patio and I'm going to talk with them on my cell phone, like do my cell phone back, that light in my eyes, do as much of my session with them outside as possible. Maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 10. If I need to come back inside, I'm going to come back inside. But those little tiny hits throughout the day really matter when we know, like what you're talking about, how much this sunlight, this natural light, especially the morning light, can impact us, from the neurotransmitters to the myelination to nitric oxide production and more.
Can we talk about fascia?
Oh, I love fascia.
Another big topic that, yes, is in our current.
I'd love to talk about fascia. I feel like fascia it's interesting, right? Because in the movement space, it is viewed as a tensegrity system, a system that distributes forces and kind of helps our body position itself and make changes to support our body based on the forces and stresses we put on it. So it's viewed in one box in the movement space. In the more like maybe massage and body work space, it's viewed as things that can hold tension, right? Like, so there's tension there. We got to release this fascia and dig into it and break it up and release it so that you don't get those knots anymore. The knots maybe at the back of your skull or in between your shoulder blades. We got to break that up. And then in the world that I'm in, the quantum biology world, no one really thinks about the fascia very much at all. It's just kind of like, yeah, okay, you go ahead and do your stretches and your movement and stuff, and you get your massage and it's all good, but really it has nothing to do with quantum biology. And I totally disagree with that 100%, because again, when you're speaking of the fractal nature of the human body, the big bands of fascia that might be helping us to distribute force, or the ones that we feel that might be knotted up in our back, those big chunks of fascia eventually get smaller and smaller and smaller, like this spider web that connects every cell of the body. It becomes this webbing in between our cells called the extracellular matrix. It actually penetrates through the cell membrane via a connective tissue receptor called integrins, and it becomes the cytoskeleton inside of our cells. It penetrates through the nucleus and becomes the nuclear matrix. So one of the reasons why it's been ignored is because it's called so many different things depending on what you're studying, but it's all the same thing. And I call it our quantum communication superhighway, because it's the only tissue in the body that touches everything and connects everything like this giant superhighway. And every single bit of fascia is surrounded by exclusion zone water, right? So like, it's this perfect receiver and conveyor of information throughout the body because of those two things.
Definitely. So one of the best things you can do for your fascial health is optimizing easy water.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So now what we know, so then diving into the area of like, why do I feel stiff? What's going on? Like, what's tissue stiffness? Well, we now know that tissue stiffness is a reduction in exclusion zone water. We know that those knots, any sort of fascial knots or adhesions or scar tissue, is a reduction in exclusion zone water. So again, you're exactly right. How can I make my fascia a better functioning unit and a better conveyor of all of this quantum information, which is in the form of light and electrons and protons? Like that's happening all the time in my body. Vibrations, it's happening all the way throughout this entire network. And that would be building exclusion zone water. So that is why then we see, okay, we see studies that say, oh, sauna improves collagen health, right? Red light frequencies improve collagen health. Well, collagen is the major component of the fascia. And so there's the connection to that, right? It all can come down to this quantum level, that these things that we do to build exclusion zone water actually, and we know, like we said, impacts collagen or whatever, wrinkles, who cares? Like all that stuff. We actually know that it's impacting that exclusion zone water. It's imbibing tissues that may be lacking in exclusion zone water with more of it. And then we just become a more quantum coherent being. And it's because we're taking good care of our fascia and the easy water around it.
Do you have opinions on wrinkles then? Because I feel like our society is very obsessed with like anti-aging, and I think like I've always tried to cultivate a very healthy relationship with aging, of being like, I'm grateful for the age that I am. Like, this is accepting the reality that I'm a human and that I do age. But then the other side of me is like quantum biology, like I shouldn't get wrinkles if I like have decreased ROS and everything.
Yeah, you know what? I feel like I feel like I don't view aging from the outside in. I view it from what's happening on the inside. And there are certain programs that we can run, our mitochondria run for us, called autophagy and apoptosis, that clear up damage that can lead to aging in my cells, which is ultimately inflammation in my cells, right? That's where my take on aging comes from. I always want to be doing what I can to optimize my repair programs. I might as well, right? I've got them built into me. It's not about applying an external serum or, doing something that causes me to never like make expressions, in my face, right? It's not about necessarily, it's not about that for me. It's about how am I taking good care of me from the inside? And that's mitochondrial health. And the mitochondrial health is they want the right light. They want cold plunges. They want, sauna, infrared, that sort of a thing. So I'm taking good care of my mitochondria. And that to me is my quote unquote, not anti-aging, but it's my repair strategy that I want to optimize. We do, right? Like I think we as a society, we focus so much on how we look when we age. And it's not where my brain wants to go. I think that when I go back to studying more of the ancient healing arts that now I know the reason behind them, all of those beautiful cultures and civilizations honored aging. And it's like, wait a second, there's a reason why that, as we got older, we were more revered and more honored in our societies and in our cultures. So I kind of like to take on that mentality. I do think looking good to myself does make me feel good. But I don't want to do things at the expense of my mitochondrial health or my fascial health. And unfortunately, I believe things like Botox and chemicals, like adding more chemicals to my body, are not the way. Maybe they'll reduce the amount of a wrinkle that I have on my face, but ultimately, what are they doing in the grand scheme of things to my quantum being, my coherence? My facial muscles moving is generating a signal to the rest of my body. Like, this is why when I smile, my whole body knows, like, I'm happy, and my heart rate variability changes, and that resonance, like, it's all connected. And if I do things that change that or impact that, I don't feel good about how that's, working with my body at that quantum level, creating a coherent being with messages being conveyed everywhere they need to go.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day of like how many people get nose jobs, but of like making this canal like smaller when it's like we need to breathe through our nose. I don't know. I just we do so many things for aesthetics versus the actual like felt sense of being a human.
Absolutely. Right. Now, like if I broke my nose and I had to have some sort of a reconstructive surgery, right, go for it. Right. Do what you need to do to be able to breathe through your nose. But I do question, because every surgery builds scar tissue. And if we know, and most surgeries involve anesthesia. Anesthesia is one of the biggest depleters of exclusion zone water, and that effect can last a fairly long time. There's a lot of repair, exclusion zone repair we have to do that we don't necessarily do, and then surgery creates scar tissue. Even if we don't physically see a scar tissue, it lines up differently than collagen in our fascia, our connective tissue, and so scar tissue can actually act as a roadblock for conveying all the information at that quantum scale. So that's just other things that I think about. It's like, is it worth it? Is it worth it to have that surgery? Not to me, now knowing what I know about quantum biology, it absolutely isn't.
That's interesting. So I've had to have surgery and I have a big scar and I feel that, tension and blockage. How do you suggest, so if someone had breast cancer and they have to have surgery there, what do you suggest helping that?
Infrared and red light therapy are two great ways to help with scar tissue. And I think that's also then where we see, okay, yeah, this stuff also impacts the mitochondria. It also impacts inflammation. I mean, it's beneficial for multiple reasons. And I think it has to do with the fact that it helps us to realign our scar tissue cross-links. So the cross-linked fibers that create a scar, it allows us to realign them. They want to be lined up linearly in these beautiful helixes, these helices. It allows us to do that, to restructure that connective tissue so that we can then convey the information. We can get around the roadblock. And so I recommend things that generate infrared, red light therapy, but that's also just being out in the sunlight. It is massaging a scar tissue first associated I've had scars. I've many scars. Like, I've been an athlete before I knew all this, right? I've had 2 knee surgeries, a shoulder surgery, a C-section, you know, I mean, I have scars. And the scar is associated with pain at first for me. So it's like, don't touch, don't touch, don't touch. And then by the time the pain goes away, I just ignore it. But actually one of the most healing things for me has been going in there and like, what does this feel like now? What does my C-section scar feel like? You know, what can I do? Does it feel like I can help to reform the fascia? Can I do stuff to support the energy flow through there? I've done it. You know, I do feel like the amount of light exposure, infrared, red light, those things, and which builds the exclusion zone water, a signal to realign the fascia, all that stuff has really helped with my scars. And I think I've reestablished way better communication throughout my body. I personally think that having my C-section scar was really impactful on my digestion when my first child was born, and also on my knee pain. So having then worked on that and recognizing that, I think that was a big roadblock in the communication happening. And now I feel like taking care of that C-section scar through a couple of different things was really helpful.
Interesting. When we're talking about aging, I would love if you have any opinions or information on females when we're going through menopause or perimenopause, and looking at all of the, you know, issues that women are seeing. And then I was reading one of my books about, you know, ancient healing modalities, which is really the way we should be healing people. And they're talking about a loss of heat happening. So I'm just wondering if that, you know, how that's connected to all of these things.
Yeah, I think that could very well be true. You know, if you think about what we see from an infant all the way through, you know, someone who's maybe 90 years old, what one linear thing that we can oftentimes track is hydration status, right? Babies can be 80% water, like babies have way more water. Whereas then all of a sudden, you know, midlife, we're like, you know, 70% water, 60% water. And then as we get older, 50% water. So there is a definite decrease in the amount of water in our bodies. Because that water wants to structure itself into EZ, that means that we're getting a decrease in our exclusion zone water. What I'm thinking one of my mentors is Alexander Wunsch. He's a light doctor. He's been using heliotherapy in Europe for a long, long time. And in one of the lectures from him that I learned was that we communicate, our bodies communicate with light, right? Photons of light, interaction with light, electromagnetic fields. Let's say we capture a photon of light from our environment, and we take an energized photon, which would be the photons more towards the ultraviolet end of the spectrum. We take this energized photon that has more energy than an infrared photon. Our cell captures it, and it takes the energy that's in that photon, and kind of this molecule takes what it needs, and then this molecule takes what it needs, and you kind of like take little nibbles of that energy until what's left is like this infrared light. And this infrared, then I think what our bodies do, he doesn't say, this is where my brain goes, but I think that infrared then interacts with the water to help create more exclusion zone water, so we don't lose it. My thought is, though, because we do live such indoor lifestyles and dehydrating lifestyles and things that don't keep that exclusion zone water replenished, I think we are losing that infrared. We're not building that exclusion zone water with it. So it is a loss of energy in a way. And what I also have found fascinating, if we're talking, you know, I like to bounce back and forth between like ancient healing and research. Research shows that the more inflamed a cell is, the more it gets rid of this infrared light and a less energetic light. So I do feel like a big change in our body as we age could be, are we maintaining enough exclusion zone water? Are we holding on to our infrared? Are our mitochondria healthy? And that then can be, I think that's why when we look at a lot of the, civilizations, cultures, populations that live more in tune with a natural cycle, we see that there's less symptoms of menopause or perimenopause. You know, sometimes it's almost unheard of. It's like hot flashes, migraines, like it's unheard of. There's no words to describe menopause or perimenopause, because they're so in tune with keeping their hydration, keeping their infrared, keeping their mitochondria healthy. So I do feel like if I'm looking at, I'm not there yet in terms of menopause and perimenopause, but what I'm excited to explore is when I do reach that point, do I have enough tools in my toolbox to just kind of make that transition happen without symptoms? Because I understand, like, I want to stay hydrated. I want my exclusion zone water to be strong. I want it to, be and have enough infrared in my life to keep my my quantum communication, my exclusion zone water happy. So, I mean, that's where my brain goes with it. And I'm actually kind of excited. I mean, maybe not yet, but I'm excited to see what that feels like, to see if I can be one of those people who they just kind of sail through it and they say, yeah, that really wasn't that big of a deal.
Even thinking about like PMS, right?
Yeah.
Symptoms of like, that's a signal from the body communicating that like there's an unmet need. And I find that so many of the things that, again, just help with energy and easy water and everything, like, helps decrease any PMS symptoms that you're having. And which I just think is so important for people to know, because I think it's been good that in society we've normalized speaking about periods more, because it's happens to many of us on the earth. But I think we've normalized it too far, where it's like, oh, I'm just PMS. Like, we dismiss it then, where it's like, okay, your body's still communicating to you. Right. And like, now there's something called PMDD, which is like then like PMS times like 10, where then you're getting like anger and like really intense symptoms, where it's like your body is like crying, like screaming up to, like, there's so many unmet needs, and so many of them are tied to disconnection, right? Especially being females, of like cycling with the moon, of that like we're so intrinsically connected with natural rhythms, and when we fall out of sync with our own natural rhythms, there is just that disconnect. But of finding that connection with nature, of seeing sun in the morning and touching the earth and doing just those simple reconnect with the rhythms of Mother Nature, connecting with our inner rhythms, like, I find so nourishing and just so life-changing for the actual embodied experience of being a female. Because in so many places, like, it's normalized for like being a female is lots of pain, or it's like your life is pain, where it's not true.
Like, right. No, absolutely. And so, like, to speak to that just a little bit deeper too, and our mitochondria, I didn't know this until I started studying quantum biology, but our mitochondria make pregnenolone, which is it's our master steroid hormone, our master sex hormone. And that pregnenolone is made from morning sunlight. It's like our eyes and our brain perceive exactly where the sun is on the horizon, its place, and it can adjust based on that circadian aspect, how much progesterone I need, how much estrogen I need. It can then also sense, am I in a state of fight or flight, where Carrie, instead of needing progesterone and estrogen and testosterone to make a baby, she needs cortisol to fight or flee. And so, and it all comes from that morning signal in my body. That morning light tells my mitochondria then can decide what to do and how to make that signal happen. And so again, reconnecting with nature and that morning light allows my body the best chance to help me make the hormonal cascade and hormonal profile I need at that given moment, at that given day, for my body to thrive. And again, being disconnected from that, it's like, that's the circadian rhythm aspect of it too. Being disconnected from that because we can work at 4 a.m. if we wanted to, and we can work all the way till, we can work all the time, right? And we can decide when I want light in my environment with artificial light and when I want dark. And just because we can decide doesn't mean that that's what's optimum. We have evolved millions and millions of years, like with the daylight cycle, this when the sun rises, when the sun sets. We have a set number of programs we want to run when the day is there, and a set number of programs we want to run when the sun sets. And when we're out of sync with that, the body knows. We might consciously be able to override it, but my body knows, my mitochondria know, my exclusion zone water knows. And I liken it to just creating cellular chaos. It's like, when my circadian rhythm is in sync, it's like an airport where there's beautiful air traffic controllers who are saying, this plane lands on this runway, then taxis this amount of time. you'll wait for this plane to pass, and then you'll get to gate A2, and then this plane. I mean, it's like a big airport with all these planes coming in and landing and taking off, and beautiful coordination, because they have a beautiful traffic controller to guide them. That's my circadian rhythm. My circadian rhythm is my air traffic controller at my cellular level. If we don't have that air traffic controller, that is not an airport that I would want to be in, right? Can you imagine chaos, that potential tragedy that happens at that airport? So if we can think of it that way as well, when I have the ultimate synchronizer for my body, all of my hormonal profiles can sync up how I need them to on my, 28-day cycle, so that it knows, okay, I have the right amount of balance of progesterone and estrogen and, luteinizing hormone and all the other hormones that we see fluctuations in throughout a monthly cycle. We'll have those fluctuations, but we'll have those fluctuations in the right balance. So yeah, maybe the day before my period, I don't necessarily feel like running a marathon, but I also don't necessarily feel like garbage and anger and just, this grouchy human being either. And I think it's because when we got that synchronizing factor, that air traffic controller, it creates more balanced rhythms in us.
Definitely. And I think too, so often we turn towards like supplement and foods and like those modalities of healing, which I think again are good and nourishing. But if we can set the circadian rhythm foundation, which then has that cascading effect, more optimal.
I agree. I feel like my own health journey and then my health journey with my clients has always been finding foundational, like what truly is the foundation upon which I layer different things. And, originally being a college athlete, I thought exercise was the end all be all. It's like, you got to get your optimum exercise in, and then it was, wait a second. No, I had a baby, my first kid, I had horrible sleep, horrible digestion. It's nutrition. I changed my nutrition and I saw some improvements there. Like nutrition is foundational. Now that I'm diving into quantum biology, I think that is a layer below those things, right? Like that is more foundational. That light environment is. I'm a lifelong learner. Will I find something that's more foundational than that? Perhaps, absolutely. But I feel like the effects that I've noticed when dealing with this quantum biology, the circadian biology, those impacts have been so profound that if that ends up just being my foundational level, I'm okay with that, because I think that that's an area that like we can address with everybody, and people can find and experience the impact of it without necessarily arguing too much about the food or the exercise that they want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. I think that no matter your age, or your diet, what all the things we've talked about, the lighting and the nature, it's accessible and proven to really heal people.
Yeah. Thinking about nutrition, you speak about glyphosate and the impact of that. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Glyphosate, also known as Roundup, is a chemical that's just been sprayed pervasively without much monitoring about how it's impacting anything from us to the microorganisms in the soil to the planet. And what I'm noticing in human physiology at that quantum level, what glyphosate does is glyphosate will damage our connective tissue. It'll damage that quantum communication superhighway. And that's because the main protein that makes up that superhighway is collagen. And collagen is built up of a specific amino acid, a prominent amino acid called glycine. It's every third amino acid in collagen. It's glycine, amino acid, glycine. And we need it to be like that for that collagen to have those beautiful triple helices and fold the right way, and then can kind of ferry all the information where it needs to go. Anything that impacts the folding of collagen will impact the exclusion zone water that can form on it, and will also impact the way that collagen can convey the electron, photon, proton information throughout the body. And what we now know is that glyphosate will replace glycine, not just in the collagen, but in anywhere that glycine residues are found in any protein. But it's the one that I've honed in on, is the fact that glyphosate, because we consume it on conventionally raised plants, fruits and vegetables, we consume it in our water, we consume it in animals that were their feed was sprayed with glyphosate, so there's a lot of ways that we can come into contact with glyphosate. And it's pervasive, it's there. But what it's doing to us at that quantum level is it's impacting that collagen. It's replacing the glycine in the collagen. So the collagen doesn't fold the same way. The exclusion zone water doesn't form ideally. And we're not getting that quantum communication in those areas.
So what can we do to avoid glyphosate?
That's the question that I'm still working on, right? There's so much more I want to learn about it. But what I have been doing with myself and my clients is, whenever possible, certified organic, or if not certified organic, I've got great relationships with local farms, small local farms that don't necessarily have that, this stamp of organic, but I've communicated with them and I know what their growing practice is like. And they don't use glyphosate. They don't use the herbicides and the pesticides. So whenever possible, consuming foods from farms like that, where that they're not using the glyphosate. So reducing your glyphosate load. And then this is also, I think, where we have seen people have been promoting things like bone broth and other glycine rich substances, because bone broth is full of glycine. So we're giving our body back that amino acid that's been taken away from us by the glyphosate, and we're telling our body, here's an overload of glycine. This is where you can now go through that autophagy, which is that cellular repair process, pull out the broken glyphosate, the one that we don't want, and replace it with the glycine. So, I'm still playing around with that. I've done glycine supplementation. I've done bone broth. I've done other forms of collagen, which also has a lot of glycine in it, like the hydrolyzed collagen. I'm noticing a benefit in my body in a couple of different ways, mostly from I feel like this is another one of the scar tissue and helping to train my body to remake healthy connective tissue. And so I'm noticing a difference. And so those are the ways that I'm experimenting with right now, but there is no set strategy yet. My goal is to avoid glyphosate as much as possible and give my body sources of glycine while I'm in that autophagy, in order to allow my body to repair where it needs to.
So washing the foods, people will do apple cider vinegar and water, washing it, or Kangen water has
it's a start
degree, but
it's a start. But the problem, and this is Monsanto's own research, the problem with that is that glyphosate doesn't just reside on the outside. It actually starts to get incorporated, because the soil is so full of glyphosate. That's any plant that has glyphosate, right? Glyphosate, phosphate, or glycine, or that it actually starts to get incorporated into the plant itself, into the cells, into the proteins of the plant, the structural components of the plant. So it's better, right? It's a step up to wash off whatever. And I don't really have a big opinion on that. I'm sure there's a bunch of places that have done a little bit more research on what works for that. It's also going then to the Environmental Working Group website and say, okay, this is the dirty dozen of 2021, which are the most sprayed produce that we have. So if you can buy these organically or just avoid them, go for it. And here's the clean 15, right? The ones that are least sprayed. Choose from this list, if possible. We can go there too. Avoiding it is hard. Washing it off isn't necessarily 100% effective. So doing the best we can with the cards that we as a global community have been dealt, and then seeing if there's some replacement strategies so we can give our body that glycine needed to make our collagen healthy again.
Yeah, definitely.
Beautiful.
Can I ask a question in regards to you being a mom?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think that is such a big influence on your life and of your lifestyle routines of having children and trying to prioritize light and managing all this of, if they have to do homework later at night or whatever it is, of how do we manage still having a family
Right.
and working with quantum biology.
Yeah. So, my brain has two different parts. My brain has, in an ideal world, right? If it was Carrie living in a cave, right, it would look a certain way, but it's not the case, right? I've got 3 kids, I've got a husband, I've got a house, I've got a job. I got a lot of stuff, like we all do. We all have stuff. And so I have to say, okay, in an ideal world, it would look like this. But for my family, with what we have going on, a kid who comes home from basketball practice at 7:30 at night and still has some homework to do, what is the best lighting strategy in that situation? It could be the incandescent bulbs that we have that have a healthier light frequency coming from them. It could be the red LEDs that we have, or I probably use a combination of those at our kitchen table most of the time for him to finish his homework. So it has been impactful. And what I always tell myself is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. It's easy to try to seek perfection in all of these areas. And oftentimes doing a lot of these things good is enough, right? So I like to say that, yes, there is an ideal way to do things. And there are some wonderful people out there who are speaking to the ideal way to do these. But I have found in my life that I have to have concessions in some of these. So perhaps my seeing the sunrise isn't climbing a mountain and seeing the sun come over the horizon. It's rolling down my windows at school drop off and sticking my head out the window and looking up at the sky facing east for 2 minutes. And that's good enough, right? And so having children has definitely impacted it, because my life is not my own, and that's okay. We're a team. We call ourselves Team Bennett, and we always want to do what's best for the team. And sometimes what's best for the team is me saying, okay, that was good enough. And that comes to the quantum biology level, all the way through all the other levels that we're dealing with team dynamics. So
beautiful. Thank you for saying that. I think that's really important to address, that there's an ideal way of doing it, but then just integrating small things can really make a big change in your life.
At the quantum scale, small things matter. So the light matters at the quantum scale, which is why I always try to do a couple of key things every morning. And when I get those things accomplished, when I have my windows down at sunrise, or I'm sticking my head out the back patio at sunrise, when I'm getting a short little walk in, ideally a longer walk, but even if it's just a short little walk in, when I'm consuming some really good filtered mineral rich water to hydrate myself, if I accomplish those things in my morning, anything else is icing on the cake. I've really set myself up on that quantum level for success.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for everything you shared with us. We love all the topics you shared. They're deeply important to us, and we're so passionate about sharing this with as many humans as possible to get us all connected on that cyclical pattern of the universe.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I had a wonderful time chatting with you too. Maybe we can do it again sometime.
Yes, please. Thank you, Carrie, so much.
Thank you.
You're lovely and brilliant.
Thank you.
Full of light. You're so
light,
full of light.
light and love. Let's all send that out, right? Light and love. So, all right.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much for this discussion. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.